Today, a Trump-brokered ceasefire is in jeopardy as Israel accuses Tehran of a breach and threatens to retaliate. How Americans view the Israel-Iran conflict. NATO leaders meet to discuss upping defense spending. And the US Supreme Court allows Trump to restart deportations to third countries. It's Tuesday, June 24th. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes every weekday. I'm Kim Vanell in Whanganui, New Zealand. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz says he has ordered the military to hit Tehran after Iran fired missiles in violation of a ceasefire announced hours earlier by US President Donald Trump. But Iran's ISNA student news agency says reports that Iran had fired missiles at Israel after the ceasefire took effect were false. It's raised early doubts about the ceasefire, announced by Trump earlier on Truth Social. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had confirmed the ceasefire, saying Israel had achieved the goals it had set in launching its June 13th surprise attack. And Iran's foreign minister set a deadline, saying if Israel stopped its attacks by 4 a.m. Tehran time, then Iran has no intention of continuing hostilities. That deadline has passed. All this within 24 hours of Iran firing 14 missiles at a US airbase in Qatar. No one was hurt. The US joined Israel in bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, dropping 30,000-pound bunker-buster bombs on underground sites after alleging Tehran was getting close to a nuclear weapon. Now, President Trump did appear to suggest that both Iran and Israel would have time to complete any missions already underway, at which point the ceasefire would begin in a staged process. Jeff Mason is our White House reporter. Jeff, what else do we know about this ceasefire?
Israel had agreed to it as long as Iran did not provoke further with more attacks of its own, and that Iran had signaled to the United States that it would not. The president is portraying it as a major victory for peace, and it gives him an opportunity to also show to his supporters, many of whom were concerned about the U.S. potentially getting tangled up in another Middle East war, that he was decisive and was able to address a crisis with quick U.S. military strikes that then eventually led to this ceasefire, if it holds.
Another official briefed on the negotiations said Qatar's prime minister also secured Tehran's agreement in a call with Iranian officials. If this goes ahead, Jeff, is it likely to hold?
I think that is the key question. I spoke to an analyst who said that Iran had an interest in agreeing to a ceasefire because essentially it can't escalate against the United States and win, and that Iran prefers to battle in different ways and basically in a proxy war and proxy battles rather than using traditional military might. Israel, this analyst told me, had also essentially achieved exactly what it was looking for by getting the United States, rather, to destroy Iranian nuclear facilities that it was not capable of doing.
As we mentioned earlier, Iran attacked a US base just outside of Qatar's capital, Doha. In a social media post, President Trump thanked Iran for giving the US a heads up, which meant no one was injured. Idris Ali covers the Pentagon.
What happened is being viewed in Washington, at least for now, as something that's being seen as more symbolic, something that many officials and experts in Washington see as something Iran had to do for domestic audience purposes, to be able to say, look, we are capable of fighting back when we need to, but at the same time, not causing damage.
A new Reuters Ipsos poll finds that Americans are worried that this conflict will spill over and that violence will continue to escalate. US political editor Scott Malone breaks down the numbers.
79% of respondents said they were concerned that Iran might target U.S. civilians in response. A similar number of respondents were concerned about the safety of U.S. military personnel in the Middle East. Importantly, we should note that this poll was taken in the hours and day following the U.S. strikes on Iran, but before Iran on Monday fired missiles at some U.S. military facilities in the region. Overall, 36% of respondents to the poll supported the airstrikes, with the strongest support among Republicans, 69% of Republicans saying they approved of the strikes. 69% is a majority, but isn't an overwhelming majority. And that shows what we know to be some dissent within Trump's party on the idea of launching some new military activity after campaigning on a promise to wrap up wars and not to begin new ones.
Trump's so-called forever ceasefire between Israel and Iran surprised markets. Investors hoping it's real and it's going to hold. Oil prices slumped 3% this morning on top of an almost 9% tumble overnight, as the immediate threat to the crucial Strait of Hormuz shipping lane appears to have eased. And US crude futures are back at $66.80 a barrel, about the lowest since before Israel's attacks on Iran began. The Supreme Court says the Trump administration can resume deporting migrants to countries they aren't from. The decision lifts a lower court order that had required migrants have a meaningful opportunity to express fears of torture at their new destination. The administration says its policy already complies with due process and is critical for removing migrants who commit crimes. In New York's Washington Square Park, Martin Martinez sums up what many are thinking.
Static. It feels like an armpit out here.
Large parts of the Northeast and Midwest are stifling hot, and heat warnings remain in place for the rest of the week. But it's not just in the US. Many parts of Europe have been sweltering too, and a team of UK scientists say extreme heat this week could result in hundreds of deaths in England. President Trump will arrive at a NATO summit in The Hague later today, eyeing a possible diplomatic win. There, leaders are expected to endorse a big new defense spending target, something Trump has long called for. Andrew Gray is our European Affairs editor and caught up with us from the very busy NATO media headquarters. Andrew, what can we expect?
Well, the big deliverable, as they say in diplomatic language from the summit, is meant to be an agreement by NATO allies to meet a big new defence spending target which Donald Trump has demanded, which is 5% of GDP. If this spending level were to be applied right now, this year, it would be hundreds of billions of dollars of extra spending. So it's a big jump for a lot of countries. And in terms of what it would be spent on, there are areas that NATO has identified as gaps, particularly areas that European nations don't have the equipment, the kit, the weaponry that the Americans have. They want to try and fill those gaps. So those are everything from air defense, missiles, and just sheer numbers of forces. We're talking about extra troops here as well.
And for today's recommended read, to Syria, where Christians are struggling to understand why their community was targeted in a suicide attack and whether they can rely on the Islamist-led government's assurances of protection. You can read the full story by following the link in the description. For more on any of the top stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. And don't forget to follow us on your favourite podcast player. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show.